major rival's technological reach could, well, completely change the way global automakers look at their supply chains.
It's a huge lesson in just how tangled these supply chains are, isn't it? But this is like geopolitical complexity layered on top.
Right.
We're basically tracing how trying to pressure one company, Nexperia, which was meant to weaken China, is instead somehow crippling car production in, Germany and North America. It's wild.
Exactly. And that's what we're focusing on today, these unintended consequences. It all centers on the seizure of Nexperia.
Yeah.
And we've got details not just on the corporate fallout, but also this massive financial backdrop.
Yeah.
Huge money supply expansion and this desperate new plan from the G7, a multi-trillion-dollar plan.
So our goal is really to connect the dots here, trace that domino effect from the chip seizure.
Okay.
Analyze the, frankly, surprising financial environment that allows these big, risky moves.
Right, the M2 expansion.
Exactly. And then really dig into this new G7 minerals plan and, well, evaluate if it even stands a chance given the flaws.
Okay, so let's start right at the beginning. The incident itself, Nexperia.
So it happens in 2025. The Netherlands, reportedly under some U.S. pressure linked to restrictions, seizes control of Nexperia.
Which was Chinese-owned at the time.
Right. And Nexperia is a giant. They make almost 100 billion chips a year.
100 billion? That's a staggering number.
It really is.
Yep.
And this is the key part. We're not talking about those super high-end AI chips that get all the press.
Okay.
These are the legacy chips, the sort of basic essential components in absolutely everything. Cars, electronics, you name it.
The workhorses.
Exactly. And Nexperia, they control about 25% of the entire world market for these things, a quarter of the global supply.
Wow. Okay, so a huge player. So the Dutch seize control. What happens next?
Well, China didn't wait around.
Yeah.
They hit back almost immediately by restricting exports of those specific Nexperia chips.
Ah.
And boom, instant supply crunch for Western companies.
It seems like the impact was incredibly fast.
Oh, it was. And the auto sector felt it first and really hard. You see how sanctions can just backfire immediately sometimes.
Yeah, the numbers are pretty shocking. Volkswagen in Germany already halting production lines.
Yes, and posting a huge operating loss, something like 1.3 billion just in 2025, all because they can't get these, relatively cheap chips.
Pennies on the dollar components causing billion-euro losses. That's something.
And it's not just VW or Europe. Honda's cutting production. Their North American plants, Canada, Mexico.
Affecting big sellers like the Civic, I read?
That's right. And the word is U.S. auto plants are maybe only, 2 to 4 weeks away from the same thing. Major shutdowns looming.
It makes you wonder, wasn't there some warning? I mean, didn't anyone see how dependent they were on this one supplier? It feels almost like they walked right into it.
Well, that's the paradox, isn't it? It really highlights a maybe misunderstanding of how integrated global manufacturing actually is.
How so?
Okay, so Nexperia, now under Dutch control, cuts the wafer supplies going to its own assembly plant in China, in Guangdong province.
Right.
But here's the crucial bit. Around 70% of the chips the EU produces actually get finished and packaged in China before they're shipped out globally.
Wait, so stopping the flow from the Netherlands to China?
Hurts the global supply chain way more than it actually hurts China in the short term. They essentially choked off their own supply pipeline.
So the U.S. and the Netherlands, they kind of shot themselves in the foot here, crippling their own industries first.
That's exactly what it looks like. A textbook case of unintended consequences. And strategically, China, of course, is going to protect its own.
Right, they'll prioritize their domestic giants.
BYD, NIO.
Over GM, Ford, or Honda, absolutely. If the chips aren't flowing out, they'll just keep what they need internally. They have a massive internal market to feed.
And now the irony is, Washington, who pushed for this whole thing,
is now apparently scrambling, basically asking China to please resume the Nexperia shipments. That says it all, doesn't it? The strategy completely backfired if you're now begging the target to undo the damage.
It confirms the whole approach was flawed from the start. For the chips to flow again globally, Nexperia has to send supplies back to its Chinese factories. There's no way around it.
And long term, this seems like it only helps China.
Absolutely. This self-inflicted wound just strengthens their position in legacy chips. Projections show them potentially making almost 40% of these essential chips by 2027.
40%.
And because of their scale and integrated system, they'll likely be much cheaper than anything the US or EU can produce.
So the domino effect is Western car production stalls, they take huge losses.
And it opens the door even wider for cheaper Chinese car exports, especially EVs and hybrids, flooding into markets like Europe.
Even with tariffs.
Yeah, tariffs are already proving kind of leaky. Chinese cars have grabbed over 7% of the EU market already. But, the only thing worse than tariffs...
Is having zero production because you can't get parts.
Exactly. That's the immediate danger facing G7 automakers right now.
Okay, so the auto sector is in crisis because of this policy failure. But that brings up a bigger point. Why did Washington feel they could even try something this risky? What's underpinning that confidence?
Well, that leads us straight into the financial system, doesn't it? It seems like there's just so much money sloshing around that they feel they can afford these high-stakes gambles, even if they fail.
Right. The only way G7 leaders can stomach mistakes like Nexperia or even think about funding these enormous counterplans
Is if the money supply keeps expanding.
Yeah.
And the M2 numbers, well, they're pretty eye-watering.
Yeah, US M2 is back in expansion territory big time, up 4.5% in September 2025 alone.
Reaching a record $22.2 trillion. Yeah. That brief dip we saw in 22-23, that's definitely over. More dollars are flooding the system.
And what does that flood of dollars really mean?
Well, fundamentally, it confirms inflation isn't just some temporary blip. It's a structural issue, a persistent crisis.
Okay.
Because you've got massive government deficit spending combined with the Fed basically stopping its balance sheet reduction.
Right, they're not draining liquidity anymore.
Exactly. So that extra $4 trillion printed during the pandemic era, it's guaranteed to stay in the system, providing this constant background liquidity. The punch bowl is still very much out, you could see.
And that liquidity fuels asset prices.
Pretty much everything. Stocks, gold, Bitcoin. It provides a tailwind for all asset classes. Wall Street sees this, sees rates expected to fall, and they leverage up. It turns the markets into a high-risk game again.
But that sounds risky. Is the system stable enough for that?
Well, that's the worry.
Yeah.
There are some serious systemic risk factors flashing. Look at the NASDAQ longest winning streak since 2017. Great.
Yeah.
But growth stocks are trading at premiums that demand, like, absolutely perfect conditions. Any stumble.
And the drop could be sharp.
Very sharp.
Yeah.
And beneath the surface, you see other signs. U.S. bank reserves, the cash buffers banks hold, they've fallen to $2.8 trillion. That's the lowest since 2020.
Okay. What does that mean in practical terms? Lower reserves.
It signals a potential liquidity crunch. Banks are less resilient to shocks. The whole system is more brittle.
Right.
Now, connect that to something like the huge AI infrastructure boom happening right now. That's heavily financed by bank loans.
Okay, I see where this is going.
If that bubble pops, or even just deflates significantly and defaults start rising, the Fed might be forced to step in with money printing on an epic scale, as one source put it.
Yeah.
Just to stop a full meltdown.
So the financial red flags are there, but the ability to print money kind of masks the immediate danger.
That seems to be the dynamic. It creates this environment where incredibly risky geopolitical moves, like the Nexperia Seizure, feel possible.
Yeah.
Affordable even.
Okay, so we have this auto crisis born from a sanction that backfired, layered on top of a financial system that's fragile but awash in cash. And against that backdrop, the G7 decides to tackle an even bigger, longer-term problem: critical minerals.
Yeah, it seems they've finally woken up to the reality that the West is just decades behind China in securing raw materials and critical minerals.
China has huge leverage there.
Immense structural power. They can turn the taps off with export controls and starve manufacturers, or they can do the opposite, flood the market, crash prices, and wipe out any potential competitor's investment overnight.
So the G7 response is this: Critical Minerals Production Alliance.
That's the plan. It's a massive, multi-trillion-dollar defensive move, basically trying to build a whole parallel supply chain from scratch.
Trillions. That sounds ambitious. How would it even work?
Well, the cost is staggering, yeah.
Yeah.
Just to be viable. The plan seems to rely on a couple of key and, frankly, quite interventionist economic tools. First, something called offtake agreements.
Offtake agreements.
Think of it like a government guaranteeing it will buy a large chunk, say 70%, of a new mine's output, probably at a pre-agreed price, even if that mine isn't really profitable or efficient on the open market.
So they're basically subsidizing potentially inefficient production just to guarantee the supply exists outside of China.
Precisely. It's paying a premium for security because they feel they have no other choice. The second mechanism is setting up price floors and big stockpiling deals.
Price floors? You mean like guaranteeing a minimum price?
Exactly. So the G7 might agree to pay, say, $10 for a specific mineral, even if the global market price is only $5.
Paying double the market rate. That sounds inherently inflationary. And anti-competitive. Doesn't that create its own problems?
Oh, absolutely. And the flaws tie right back to the financial situation we just talked about.
How so?
First, this whole thing has to be financed through more debt and deficits because, well, the West is basically broke in terms of spare government capital.
Okay.
Second, when you set a price floor way above the market rate, what happens? Industrial buyers, they don't want to order as much at that higher price.
Right. Why pay $10 when you can get it for $5 elsewhere?
Exactly.
Hmm.
So that forces the G7 governments themselves to buy up the excess supply just to keep the price floor intact and the subsidized mines running.
Which means spending even more money.
And pulling capital away from potentially more productive parts of the economy into these less efficient subsidized ventures. And yes, that absolutely dials up inflation across the G7, making that whole M2 problem even worse.
It sounds like a vicious cycle. Debt, subsidies, inflation.
And here's the final kicker, the real contradiction.
Right.
Even as they're trying to build this hugely expensive anti-China alliance,
Yeah.
individual G7 members, like Canada, for example, are still trapped. They need access to Chinese markets. So they're simultaneously working hard to repair relations, boost exports to China, accept diplomatic invites.
Because they can't afford to fully decouple.
They simply can't.
Mhm.
They're caught in this bind trying to escape Chinese supply chains while desperately needing Chinese customers. It's a fundamental tension.
Wow. All right, so just to recap the threads here, we've seen this targeted chip seizure backfire spectacularly, crippling Western auto production. We've seen a financial system running hot, fueled by record money supply, but showing real signs of fragility underneath.
Right, the M2 expansion and low bank reserves.
And now this multi-trillion-dollar G7 plan to counter China on minerals, which seems almost designed to increase G7 debt and inflation.
It really highlights the core issue.
Yeah.
Global industries are just so tightly interconnected now. When you try to forcefully cut out a key node like Nexperia,
The fallout is immediate.
immediate and painful. And ironically, it often ends up strengthening the very competitor you were trying to checkmate. The auto industry was already feeling the squeeze from Chinese competition.
And the self-inflicted chip shortage just pours fuel on the fire.
It risks accelerating that flood of cheaper Chinese EVs and hybrids into Western markets, especially places like the EU, where tariffs aren't really holding them back effectively.
So wrapping this up, what's the key takeaway for someone listening? What should they be thinking about?
Well, maybe consider this. If the only thing worse than tariffs is literally not being able to produce anything at all, if the main economic battle now less about winning the race for fancy AI chips and more about just securing the basic, cheap, essential legacy components, the things that actually keep the lights on and the assembly lines moving.
Securing the basics. That's definitely something to think about as these huge trillion-dollar strategies play out.